Um, well, about 15 miles east of the Jamestown Wesleyan Campground is a wide spot in the road that is also on the National Historic Register. It is a place called Rugby, Tennessee. Now, Rugby, Tennessee was um, founded back in the 1800s by a gentleman named Thomas Hughes, who was an author, most famous for a book called Tom Brown School Days. Um, and the fictional school in this book was called Rugby. So that's where the town was named. But the reason he came over from England to start this town is because he was a second son. Second sons in England in that day, I don't know if it's changed or not, but in that day, when the father died, everything went to the first son. So the second son didn't have much promise to look forward to. In addition to that, the second son had to be was very limited into what professions they could go into. And so Thomas Hughes thought to himself, well, I'll just go build a bigger, better society, a utopian society. I don't know if you have any utopian areas in Kentucky, but we probably have 4 or 5 that were started in Tennessee, and none of them remain to this day. Rugby still does, but not as a utopia. So he and he never actually lived there, but his mother did. And a bunch of second sons and their families came over from England. And this was, I don't know if you've been to East Tennessee, it's not real cosmopolitan. But you can imagine 150 years ago, it was even less so. I mean, this is out in the middle of nowhere even to this day. But they had a lending library that still exists, had 7,000 books. They had a grand hotel that's been burned down twice. But a lot of the architecture, matter of fact, there's an Episcopal church that still exists, that's still in operation. And it's a very neat little place. The colony itself did not last more than about 5 years because although they had some culture going for it, they had tennis, they played tennis, right? They had their social clubs. It was an anomaly in Tennessee, I'm sure then. It was contradiction to the times that they lived in. But they had everything going for it, except for the fact that they didn't realize there was going to be a typhoid epidemic break out, and they didn't realize that they were going to actually have to farm in those rough Tennessee hills to make a living. And they didn't realize that the promised railroad that was supposed to come through there and make a stop there in Rugby was not going to materialize. So they had all these grandiose plans, and just like many other utopias, they just fall by the wayside. But I can understand the plight of a second son. There's a second son in Scripture, and his name was Jacob. We're going to talk about Jacob this morning. Jacob was a second son, and like many of us, we probably grew up and maybe we didn't have the best of circumstances when we grew up. Maybe we were limited and had a lot of things against us. And so we're always wanting something that we don't have, trying to make something happen to compensate for the problems that we were born into or maybe that we faced. So in that sense, we all, in some sense, are second sons. Jacob had quite the story. I don't know if you're familiar with Jacob, probably most of you are, but Jacob, being a second son, was definitely a surprise, right? You know, women get pregnant today, and it's a surprise. They weren't planning on having a child. Well, Rebecca, Jacob's mother, was even more surprised because they didn't have ultrasounds in that day. And so she thought she was going to give birth to one boy, and what happened was she gave birth to 2. Esau came out first, and guess what? Jacob was hot on his heels and literally was holding onto his heel when Esau was born. And so Jacob actually means deceiver because it threw Rebecca for a loop. She didn't know. She was deceived thinking she had 1 son, and now she has 2. And it also means supplanter. He's trying to hold on to that first son status, even from birth. But even then, as a first son or second son, the first son got all the stuff. The first son got the birthright. The first son got the blessing. And Jacob knew that. Jacob was not a rough and tumble kind of guy. He was a mama's boy. And yet his brother, the firstborn Esau, was more of a hunter. He was more of a man's man. And Jacob was more of a stay behind and fix some victuals, right? Till the men come home. And so you can imagine in that agrarian eat, kill culture, and that go home and bring home the bacon literally, except they were Jewish, so they didn't bring home bacon. That Jacob really didn't probably feel like he fit. And looking at his prospective future, didn't think he had much going for him. But he was smart. And so what he decided to do was to scheme and deceive. And what he did was, his brother came from the field one day after hunting, and he was hungry, and Jacob had some good white beans on the stove. And they smelled good. And Esau was hungry. He said, look, give me a bowl of beans. Well, he said, I'll trade you. Jacob said, I'll trade you for your birthright. Well, he was so hungry. You know, sometimes we're led by our appetites. And so Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of beans, right? And I've had a bunch of beans in my day, and I like beans, white beans and ham. Yeah, I don't know that I've ever had a bowl that good that I would just sell away my future. But Esau did that. And then later on, as Isaac, his dad, started to get old and got hard to see, and he was about ready to die, Jacob and Rebekah, his mom, schemed together to get the blessing. It was reserved for the first son. And so Jacob put on some hairy skins on his arm, because Esau was hairy. He was a man's man, remember? And he went in and asked for the blessing, and Isaac couldn't see. He says, is that you, my son? What? You don't sound like Esau. Well, I just feel my arms. And he says, okay. Well, he blessed him. Now, that was all good and fine until Esau found out. And he was livid. Esau went into a rage and said, I'm going to kill that little brother of mine. And Rebekah said, hey, Jacob, take off. I've got a brother. Go to his place. I won't tell him where you went. And so Jacob took off and went to his uncle Laban's place. And on the way, it was more than one day's journey. And on the way, he fell asleep at this place, and he had this dream. We call it the Jacob's ladder, right? And he had this dream of angels ascending and descending upon this ladder. And Jacob wakes up and says, surely God was in this place, and I did not know it. But that dream, God told him, he says, when you return to this place, when you return to your home, I'm going to bless you. I'll be with you while you're gone, but when you come home, I'm going to bless you. And your descendants will be as numerous as the sand on the seashore. Jacob, he said, like he was amazed by the dream. He woke up and was astounded, but he kept on going. He had an encounter with God. God says, when you come back here, I'm going to bless you, but I'll be with you when you go. And so Jacob kept on going. And he gets to Laban's house. And he meets his future wife, Rebekah, Laban's daughter. And he works 7 years for Rebekah. And guess what? Laban deceives him and hands him Leah, which is the older daughter. Jacob, unbeknownst to him, because she was veiled, ends up marrying Leah instead of Rebekah. You imagine he was none too happy. But then Laban says, look, here's what I'll do. You work another 7 years for me, and I'll give you my other daughter. And so he works another 7 years, and then he marries Rebekah. And then through the course of the next 6 years or so, they have kids. Both of the wives have kids. And Jacob has another dream. Now, around this time that Jacob has this dream, he's starting to hear some rumblings. He's starting to hear some problems in the camp. Laban's sons are upset that Jacob is blessed. Just like Jacob was upset that Esau was blessed. And you know, the more you, just like Joseph's brothers, you remember when they talked about how much of a problem Joseph was? Eventually it came to a head. Well, Jacob understood that this is not good, right? They outnumber me. I'm not the manliest of men, and they could probably just take me anytime they wanted. So he's starting to feel a little uncomfortable in Laban's house. Then he has a dream. And the Lord says, look, go back home. I hear what's going on in Laban's house. I see how Laban's mistreating you. He's changed your wages a number of times. Anybody have your pay cut? That's not a fun thing to have happen. Well, Laban was doing that to Jacob. And God says, I see that. So I want you to go back to your homeland. I mean, it's been 20 years, so I'm surely everything is smoothed out by now, right? So Jacob, he says to Laban, look, I want you to go. Laban says, just stay with me a little bit longer. Laban and Jacob's thinking to himself, I got to go. So Jacob wakes up one day and he gets his wives together, doesn't tell Laban, but takes off back home, right? He takes all the stuff that he's got and he heads back toward the house, back toward his brother Esau. And Laban finds out about it. He was none too happy. So he gets the posse together, as it were, and goes after Jacob. And in chapter 31, he catches up with Jacob. But the night before he catches up with Jacob, Laban has a dream. And Laban has a dream that God tells him, don't say anything either good or bad to Jacob. Just keep your hands off of it, basically. So Laban catches up with Jacob the next day. And he really kind of gives him the right act, but he says, I can't do anything because God is keeping me from saying anything good or bad. And that's where we find the story. And the first thing I see about that is we all want to reach out and get something we don't have. We all feel incomplete on the inside. Just like that song, Mercy Came Running, is about the prodigal son who took, as well taken care of as he was in the father's house, he took his inheritance and left to a far land, looking for something that he didn't have. Jacob was looking for something he didn't have. And he gets there to Laban's house and all these things. He gets the blessing. He's got 2 wives and he's doubly blessed, right? All these kids, all these animals. I mean, and yet he has this nagging emptiness in his soul. Like something's missing. And then all of a sudden, this dream, these rumblings, okay, it's time to go. So he's always trying to find something he doesn't have. Although he has all the world's wealth now, it's not enough. He had to learn to leave the past behind. Again, I'm going to use that quote, one of my favorite quotes from one of the Disney movies. You may have heard me say that, Pumbaa in The Lion King. He says to Timon, he says, sometimes you got to leave your behind in your past. You just now getting it. Well, okay. Better now than later. Jacob had to learn to leave the past behind. He took off running. He was running to get something he didn't have at the beginning. He was afraid he was going to miss out. It was the fear of man. He was afraid in this life he was missing out. There's something more that he doesn't have. And so what he tries to do is he tries to steal it. And then it doesn't work out because his brother gets like in a rage. And so he runs from his brother. Now he's running back home from Laban. He's always running. Never found home. He's always running. So he's got to step out of the fear of his brother, to step out of the fear of man and the fear of missing out. All these fears, worried about what others think of him, what others might do to him. He was just living by fear. Now, fear is not a bad thing, right? The fear of the Lord is what? Beginning of wisdom, right? So God has given us the ability to have a healthy understanding of what we should fear. Jesus said, don't fear him who can kill the body only, but fear him who can not only kill the body, but cast the soul into hell as well. Fear him. Now, Paul did tell Timothy, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. So our fear is a reverential, submissive fear, submitting to the will and the word of God. But to do that, you have to get out of the fear of man. You have to quit saying, okay, what is it I don't have? I want something that I don't have. I'm always chasing after the wind. You have to step out of the fear of man, then you have to step into the fear of God. Now, how did Jacob do it? He did it, first of all, he had the circumstantial pressures up on him. You know, pressure makes you want to move, doesn't it? Like if I came up and pushed somebody, they're going to move. When you have circumstances in your life that are painful, that are problematic, guess what? You want to move away from that. Coinciding with that, he had the dream from God, saying, okay, you need to move. So the two necessarily aren't, the pressures are not necessarily sufficient of themselves, but coinciding with the work and the will of God, you need, God said, look, you need to fear me. You need to do what I've called you to do, and step out of the fear of man, step into the will of God, and set up some holy boundaries. So when Laban did catch up with Jacob, here's what happened. Laban says, I can't say anything bad to you, so let's just cut and run, right? Let's cut our losses. Let's just make a deal, cut a deal. I won't come past this marker. You won't come past this marker to hurt me, and I won't come past this marker to harm you. And so they set up some stones, kind of like a boundary marker. And every time that they saw that, they would remember their deal, right? And so when you're walking away from the mistakes and the fears of the past, set up a marker. Set up a holy boundary. Say, I'm not going to go down that road anymore. I'm not going to let my emotions take me there anymore. I'm not going to be led by guilt, fear, and condemnation. I'm not going to be led by the guilt that somebody else puts on me. It's set up a marker and say, okay, I've decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. We need to sing that song. They must have forgotten it. Set up those holy boundaries and holy markers. Remember what God has done. God has been involved. Remember his protection. You hear the dream that God gave Laban. God has protected him the whole time. God had been with him. He remembered the dream in Bethel. He remembered the dream that God said, I will be with you. Not only did God protect him, he provided for him. And he superintended. His providence was in Jacob's life, even though Jacob was running. Even though Jacob thought he had it figured out and did not have it figured out. God was superintending, like, okay, like, anybody here fish? Okay. You know what a drag is? Right? So you set your drag so the fish doesn't break your line. So you catch a fish, and the fish starts running, and you still have the fish on the line, but you set the drag loose enough that it doesn't break the line. So even though Jacob was running, God still had him. God still was tethered to him. And so those markers will help me remember what God has been doing in my past. Will help me remember the life that I left behind. Because if you're like me, you look back to years gone by, and the pain you felt in the past, you don't feel anymore. You know what I'm talking about? You get so far removed from the pain of the past that you don't remember. And sometimes you can fall into the false sense of security, thinking that because I don't feel the pain now, I can go back to doing the same things. I can go back to thinking the same way. I can go back to feeling the same way. Because I don't remember the pain. I've forgotten the pain of the past. But I see that boundary there. Now let me remember why I put that there. I put that there so I wouldn't go past it. Because what was past that was bondage and deception. So Jacob had the stuff of the world, right? But he was suffering the consequences of his own deception. He was being deceived by Laban. And he was bound in Laban's house. And so Jacob had to set up a marker to remember, I can't go back there. But Houston, we have a problem. Now, Esau, exactly. Now, as he starts to get closer to home, he starts thinking. Sometimes, your thoughts can like snowball. But what if this happens? What if he has not forgotten? It's been 20 years, but still, he's probably still mad because he was furious. And so he's starting to have these thoughts about his brother Esau. And so even though Jacob is heading in the right direction, he still has some fear, right? Have you ever had to face a fear? Right? There's a reason we don't face fears, because they scare us. And so Jacob's going back home, and yet he has this lingering memory how mad his brother was. And so what does he do? I'll devise a plan. Right? I'll soften him up. I'll butter him up. I'll prime the pump, as it were. And so what did he do? He has all the stuff that God had blessed him with, right? All the stuff that he had stolen from his brother, right? The birthright and the blessing. He has all this stuff, and he goes, okay, here's what I'll do. The stuff's not going to do me any good if I'm dead, right? I'll send it ahead. But not all of it. I'll send some of it ahead. And then a little bit later on, I'll send more of it ahead. Wave after wave of goodness from Jacob to Esau. And surely, the end of it, maybe Esau will accept me. Maybe Esau will have his anger diminished. Maybe we can have a brotherly love once again. But he's still afraid. So when you have faced your fears, you actually faced them. Right? If you're not facing your fears, you're still afraid of them. Jacob was still afraid, but he was walking in faith. Faith does not mean that you won't have fear. It means that you trust God more than you fear man. And so Jacob is learning to lean into and upon the promises of God. In verses 9 through 12 of chapter 32, he basically goes to God and says, I'm afraid. You have promised me all these things. You have blessed me with all these things. You have told me that if I came back here, you would bless me. You told me that you would be with me. I went over, I left with a walking stick. I had a stick in my hand. That was it. Now look all the stuff you blessed me with. It was you. It wasn't me. I see your hand in it. You said you would deal with me, but man, I tell you what, Lord, I am afraid. He responded with some honesty. He didn't say, "Oh, I'm going to put on a face like don't recognize my feelings. I don't recognize this fight or flight feeling within me. I so want to run away. And yet, Lord, you said, if you'll return home, you'll bless me. You'll deal well with me. I'm just trying to walk out the path that you set me on, but I am still afraid. But even when I was running away from you, you still blessed me. You still kept me. You still had a plan for me. You were patient with me. You were long-suffering with me. You still, I may have forsaken you, but you didn't forsake me. And if you were faithful then you'll be faithful now. You said if I come back, you would bless me. You said if I come back, you would deal well with me. Now I'm facing something that says you won't. I'm facing my brother, and if he kills me, it doesn't seem very good to me. Romans 8:28. For I know all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. I have to lean, I have to hold on to the goodness of God. I have to hold on to the promises of God. I have to hold on to what God has said, what God has done, what God will do. We were talking about being shaken yesterday, Dana and I. You know, when you're shaken up, like when you get bad news or something, you're shaken up, or when you're in a car wreck and you're shaken up, when you have something go wrong and you're shaken up, you look for something to hold on to that's solid, that's stable. And that's where you need to lean on the promises of God, because your emotions, if you let them lead you, they'll take you in the wrong direction. And so Jacob goes back and he prays, Lord, I know that you said this, and I'm going to keep walking in that direction. I don't know how you're going to deal with this. I've got a plan. You haven't given me a plan B, so I'm just going to carry out my plan. And so he doesn't turn back. He continues to move forward. The older I get, the closer I get. You know what I'm talking about? And you have questions about what's going to happen. None of us know. We have to lean on promises of God. So Jacob comes to this camp called Mahanaim. Probably didn't pronounce it right. But that word literally means double camp. 2 camps. So when he comes to that, he sees that God's in that place. But he's also in that place with his camp. He's like, okay, I'm going to call this place 2 camps. Well, that's very telling, because up to this point, God had his plan and Jacob had his plan, right? Now they're at least converging. They're starting to get back in sync with one another. Jacob has finally returned to the place of blessing. But the problem is, as long as you have 2 camps, as long as you have two wills, as long as you have 2 possible directions, how can 2 walk together unless they be agreed? Right? You have to come to the common understanding. It's what we talked about this morning, the will of God. You have to choose this day whom you will serve. You have to choose who your authority is. You have to choose who I'm going to follow. Am I going to follow my own desires and dictates and determinations? Or am I going to follow what God says in his word? Paul writes to the Thessalonians, we're talking about this morning, Paul said, you should do this, and you should do that, and you should do the other. Doesn't mean you will. But when you choose the authority of God in your life, you will do that, right? Because now I'm bringing my will into alignment with his will. So he comes to this place of 2 camps. And he doesn't realize that he's still double-minded. He's like, okay, I'm getting closer, but something has to happen. He'd heard the promises of God, right? Remember, his father was named Isaac. His grandfather was named Abraham, right? And I'm sure that Abraham and Isaac, with all that they went through, with all that God had done in their life, they had shared with Jacob the promises and plans that God had for him, because that promise was continuing on, right? In you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, and in you, your seed will be blessed. So he's coming back into alignment with that. Something has to happen. So he has that plan going on where he just sends some cattle, some sheep, some goats. He sends it ahead, and the servants are saying when they get to Esau, these are from your servant Jacob. So he sends wave after wave of blessing from his goods. And pretty soon he's still got the fear. He still poured out himself. He poured out everything he had. And it says that he comes to the place, the ford of the Jabbok, and crosses over. The Jabbok is a creek, is a river. And the ford is simply a place where you cross. But again, this is where it's very interesting because Jabbok means emptying. Right? So as long as we have something to hold on to, as long as I have some hope, I can hold out for something, right? I'll trust God, but here's my plan B. Now, Jacob had emptied himself. He'd sent wave after wave after wave of all his goods, all the things that he had been blessed with were stolen from Esau. And even his 2 wives and his 11 children he sent ahead. And he crossed over the place of emptying. And guess what? It says that he was alone. Now, if you grew up in the 70s like I did, you remember a song from Three Dog Night, One That You'll Ever Do, right? You know what? And I looked it up. The word alone in the Hebrew is bad. And that's how it's pronounced, bad. Being alone is bad, right? And God said, it is not good that man should be alone. It's not good, it's bad. So here, Jacob has everything Jacob had and he was reaching for and grabbing for, he got a hold of, he'd given it all up. He'd emptied himself. All those fears of losing out, of missing out, of not having enough, not having a future, he'd given it all up. He'd emptied himself. And he was alone. But he wasn't. The angel of the Lord showed up. The angel, capital A. The pre-incarnation of Christ, right? Shows up. And Jacob wrestles with him. We call that the dark night of the soul. When you have something you just can't get away from. The fears that just dog you in the middle of the night when there's no light. You can't see anything. Those thoughts and those feelings just go over and over like billows crashing into your soul. And Jacob's finally having to face himself. Jacob is finally having to face God. Oh man, I think you're scared now. That's what we don't like to be alone. Because we don't like to face ourselves. We don't like who we are. We don't like our limitations, our shortcomings, our failures, our sin. We don't like those things and we don't want to face them. So we put on, I've got a crutch up here. Because you know when you got a bad knee, like I had a twist in my knee this year, you know what you do? You compensate. You start putting more weight on the other knee, right? Right? And you hobble along. But I don't want to compensate, so I get a crutch, right? Jacob's crutch was his wives and his families and all his stuff that he had stolen. That was his crutch. And so he didn't want it to look like he was limping. He had to compensate. You hear a lot about reparations these days and compensation because people grow up and they know they grew up in less than perfect, ideal situations. So they don't want to hide who they are. They want to hide who they are, and they want to cover themselves with something that makes them more valuable, more useful, more acceptable. So Jacob had been hiding, but now he can't hide. He's by himself. So all the two camps, that one camp's all he poured himself out of himself. I heard somebody say once that, and I've used it. I can remember it. All you do is invest in yourself. You'll have nothing to show for yourself but yourself. Jacob's like, there's got to be something more. I'm going to trust God. I'm going to face my fears. I'm going to face my failures. I'm going to face everything I've been running away from. And so the angel of the Lord wrestling with Jacob in this place in the middle of the night, as the sun is starting to peak or to crest above the horizon, the angel says, "Let me go." He says, "I will not let you go until what? Until you bless me. I will not let you go until you bless me." And the angel does something the angel, capital A, does something very peculiar. He says, "What is your name?" Jacob. Deceiver. Loser. Failure. Outcast. That's who I am. You know who I am. But we don't want to show anybody who we are. God knows who we are. And he's bringing Jacob face to face with who he is. We think we need this, that, or the other to make us of worth, of value. And the angel of the Lord says, "I just need you to come to me honestly. I just need you to quit on putting on airs. Quit covering yourself with your accomplishments. Embrace your limitations." Ooh, there's a scary one. Embrace your limitations. Sinner, I'm a sinner saved by the grace of God. I'm a wretched man. That's who I used to be. Still wrestling through that. Amen? That's what Paul tells the Thessalonians, that you would keep doing this more and more. You keep growing in sanctification. Keep growing into who God created you to be. Keep letting go of your past. Keep turning your back and setting up those holy boundaries that you won't go back there. We had a guy in our church, and I say, "Oh man," who was paralyzed. His name was Peter King. He had a brother named Roger King. Roger King lived, and they were both from New York. And Roger would come by to visit every now and then. And I found out a little bit about Roger. Roger, when he went into a store and he went to get something off the shelf, he would take one off the shelf and then put it back and take the second one. He would always take the second one because he thought something would be wrong with the first one. I don't know if he looked at his brother in a wheelchair who had polio and maybe thought, "Look, I don't know. He never said that to me. But you know that we have these fears that are deep set, that we don't even know exist. Some other people know they exist in us because they can see it, but we can't see it. You ever heard of short man syndrome? Well, I wonder why you've heard of that. Because it exists, right? So you try to compensate for your limitations. You try to compensate for your failures. You try to compensate so others will see something of value in you that you don't see in yourself. Some of the funniest people on the planet, comedians, have some of the greatest hurt in their lives. And so what they do is they try to compensate for the pain that they feel by covering it with humor. Although I am not one of the funniest people in the world, I certainly understand that because, like you, I've faced my share of pain. And so I try to compensate for that with humor. And I don't even know that still exists because I'm not cognizant of it. I don't think about it. It's just I've compensated. I have to commit to quit running away. Stay in the fight. Lord bless me. I ain't got nothing else. Receive the injury, because what happened was the angel of the Lord touched Jacob's hip. The angel changed his name from Jacob, deceiver, to Israel, prince with God. It wasn't just a name on a piece of paper. This was a total transformation of who he was. He wasn't no more compensation, no more reparation. It was transformation. But to remember that, the angel touched his hip, said, "No more running away. Now you got to limp along." Right? We need to receive the injury. Paul says, "I will therefore most gladly boast in mine infirmities, because when I am weak, I am strong." Lord, bless me. Am I willing to pray that, even if it means that something causes me injury? I hope so. Hope you are too.